fortunate that I work at a company that the vast majority of the time they want me to do what is right by the law, what is right morally, what is right for the client, and they don't want me to do things that are against the law. I have had times, though, where I have clients that have directly tried to make me do that. I can give you numerous examples, but one of the most vivid examples for me was a few years ago when one of my clients called me up, and his mother was very wealthy, had many millions of dollars, and she was close to death. And he told me he had this wonderful plan to avoid paying taxes to the IRS. He said, "Bruce, I've got this plan. I'm going to take all my mom's money, and I'm going to put it into safe deposit boxes all around the city, and then we just won't tell the government, that she has all this money, that she won't have to pay taxes when she dies." And I said, "Well, Bill, there's a word for that." And he said, "Oh, what is it?" I said, "Bill, that's called fraud." It's called illegal. And Bill said, "Well, no, it's just between you and me. I know what the government thinks, but just between you and me." And I said, "Bill, just between you and me, I call that fraud." It's illegal. You can't do it. Like I said, that's a little more blatant than some of the situations you run into. But there are many times when by taking a stand and telling a client that he shouldn't do something because of legal reasons or tax reasons, that I haven't always been as popular as I should be. But in most cases, clients have acknowledged that the right thing to do is what they should be doing. And I believe as Christians we need to have that integrity in our labor. A third element of just the witness of our labors is what I call the value of our work. Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "You should never confuse motion with action." And what I think he meant by that is people can often be very busy, but it doesn't mean they're really accomplishing anything. And as Christians, we need to be very conscious of how we're being effective with our work. And I think it's important to recognize that there are two basic values to work. And these were, I first read about these in a book by Doug Sherman called Your Work Matters to God. And the first value of work, in any kind of truly legitimate work that God might give us to do, whether it's paid or unpaid, is there's an intrinsic value. And one of the things that's important here is that people sometimes think that because of the curse, that somehow work itself is part of the curse in Genesis 3. And yet, God told Adam to work the garden in chapter 2:15, that work was not part of the curse, work was a gift. It was a gift to, could use some water. I prefer this to Pepsi, but I know it's a good company. That work is a gift, and that God is a worker, that God worked in creation, that God continues to work in salvation, otherwise, and that there is an intrinsic value to doing work. I know I first learned the value of work when I was in 8th grade, at least the beginning of the value of work, when my friend Dave Atkinson and I wanted to earn a little extra spending money. And so we rode down to the local YMCA, and they had a job bank there, and there was a job that was listed where they wanted two boys to scrape paint off a house in another part of town where I grew up. And they wanted to pay those people $65 each to scrape paint off the house. And this was back in the 70s. But that was still, seemed to us like a lot of money. It really wasn't that much money even back then. But we agreed to this before we even saw the job, before we even saw the house. And so my friend and I bike over to this house. It turns out to be this 3-story Victorian mansion, with these incredibly high ceilings and porches. And we ended up working 10 hours a day for about 5 weeks, just scraping the paint off of this house. And I calculated my wages at the end of that time. It was something like 37 cents per hour. But I learned the value that if you're going to work for money, you should make sure your compensation is going to be fair with what your effort is. But there's value to our work, and we need to recognize that. The second thing that I think is important, not only the intrinsic value, is there's an instrumental value to work. That through our work we're able to serve people, we're able to meet personal needs, provide for your family, have resources to give, and demonstrate your love for God. And for me in my job, what I sort of have that passion for is that I'm helping people to be good stewards of their resources. I'm helping them to use those resources for purposes that are meaningful to them, and hopefully meaningful for others in terms of how that money is used. And every legitimate job has some sort of instrumental value in which you're able to serve people. And that's an important element to be thinking about. I want to share briefly just about what I would call some basic principles for working with integrity. And the first principle may seem too basic, but I mention it because I think it's relevant, and that's to work hard. And what I mean by that is that, God wants us to give, if we're being paid by an employer, whoever that employer is, that we should give a full day's work for a full day's pay. We should not be using company resources for personal purposes, beyond what might be minimal. That you really need to have a standard of you're going to give your best effort for your company during the time that you're working for them. And again, this may sound really basic, but having hired hundreds of people over the years, I realize that not everybody shares that work ethic. Many non-Christians don't share it, and not sure always Christians share that. But I think as a Christian perspective, is you have to be willing to work hard. If you're going to have a witness for Christ from the marketplace, if you're going to integrate your faith with the work that God calls you to do. The second basic principle I have is to choose to be positive. And again, this is something that I'm very aware of in the work world, how easy it is to be negative, how easy it is to be critical, how easy it is to gossip about other people that aren't doing their jobs, and complaining about the clients, and complaining about whatever you don't like at the office, or complaining about your coworkers. And I believe that God wants us to be positive about our work, that He wants us to be thinking about what is good, to be problem solvers rather than problem creators. That's something I'm always working on with my kids. When they come up with a problem to me, how can we solve this problem rather than just whine about it? How can we find a solution together? And I think that's true for the work world. I like the proverb about a man without a smiling face ought not to open a shop. I think it's very true that we need to have a positive perspective. A third basic of being in the work world for Christ is having an efficient time management. That time is your most limited resource. Ben Franklin once said that lost time is never found again. That you really need to be very conscious in how you spend your time. And often that means working smarter rather than working harder. I'm not talking about being a workaholic here, and I'll cover a little more about balance in our life.